child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. What is an example of that you've seen or experienced firsthand? Story 1. There was this one pro-revenge story I read where the poster's mom was abused and gave birth to him. He got bullied by everyone and their grandma because he was an unholy child. He grew up to be something that inspected towns or something, I don't remember, so he was assigned to his hometown and their town was pretty bad. But since he grew up in this town, they'd get a free pass. He left a bad review or something and ruined the whole town financially, and as expected, he was very satisfied. I don't know if this counts as experience, but oh well. Story 2. I went to school with a kid who seemed a little disturbed. Maybe it's just my bias, but he definitely seemed like the school shooter type. Well, no one liked this kid and constantly picked on him. Once, in some random class in 7th grade, I asked him if he wanted to be my partner for some dumb little assignment, we chatted in class for the rest of the year. Towards the end of high school, he told me I had kept him from some bad stuff by being his best friend. I literally only talked to him in class for a few months, and by that point, hadn't talked to him in years. Embrace everyone, folks. You never know how it might change someone's life. Story 3. A few years ago, I knew a girl who I think is a good example of this. She was diagnosed with AD back in primary school and was shunned by her whole family because of it. As a result, she had low self-esteem and slowly developed a profound hatred for people. This caused everyone at school to hate her, which in turn fueled her hatred even more. After her 17th birthday, she ran away. But before she did, she spent about 5 years gathering dirt on everyone who wronged her. She released it all, resulting in her parents splitting up and a bunch of other kids being expelled or getting into trouble with their parents. If memory serves me correctly, one kid even got disowned because of what everyone found out about him. She ended up running up to a family friend of mine and is still working on rebuilding her life. It's a shame because she's one of the nicest people I know and a very honest person. Everyone just treated her like crap, so she burned it all. Story 4. There was a kid in my class who attended special behavior classes before being put into our class in 4th grade. My teacher was tough on him, and one day he had a tantrum and threw a chair. As a result, he was sent back to the special classes, which likely devastated him. He continued on at school and eventually became one of the freaks in high school. He always wore a trench coat, in Texas no less, and was into nerdy things. I talked to him sometimes, but we weren't really friends. We would discuss things like his AD&D book, as my uncle had introduced me to RPGs. In 11th grade, our school went into lockdown for an unknown reason. It was later revealed that he had committed suicide in one of the school bathrooms. Apparently, he had written letters to faculty and friends before taking his own life. Story 5. I work with kids who have mental health issues. They often come from traumatic family situations that have contributed to their problems. One common scenario we see is a child who comes to us after being belittled and told they're garbage by their parents or guardian for years. Eventually, the child begins to act out, which the adult then uses as proof that they were right all along about the child being terrible. I once worked with a boy who had parents like this. He had been in and out of treatment programs for years due to their emotional and verbal abuse. His father was often on the road driving a truck and was checked out when he was home, while his mother had a personality disorder and was extremely abusive. One day while his father was away, the boy murdered his mother. Story 6. I worked at an ice cream shop, but I won't say which one, although they have slightly more than 30 flavors. My boss was a conservative Mormon who criticized me whenever a piercing or tattoo was showing. The manager and boss would sit in the back and assign me physically exerting tasks, while one of them spent an hour frosting a single cake. Legally, employers are entitled to a lunch break after working 6 hours, but my boss would regularly make me work through my lunch breaks. At the time, there were only 5 employees, and we were all overworked and begging our boss to hire new people. I'm generally an easygoing person who likes to help others and make them smile. I got along well with my coworkers, always cracking jokes with them and dancing. I completed my closing duties early and made sure to cross off every task. Over time, I noticed that my paychecks were not what they should be, by almost $2 an hour. Although the minimum wage had gone up and I was a shift lead, I received only a $1 bonus. After going through my checks, I realized that I had been cheated out of almost $3,000 from the time I started working until it was brought to my attention. I asked my boss about it, but she claimed that the $1 bonus did not exist unless it was handwritten by her, and she asked me to apologize to her for accusing her of cheating me. 2 weeks later, I was fired, and when I asked why, my boss would not give me a reason. Upon learning that I had been fired, 3 of 4 employees quit that day, leaving only the manager who had arrested me and the younger girls. The other employees were inexperienced and had been there for less than 4 months. They were already overworked and stressed. I felt that I brought a sense of calmness to the chaos when it got busy, and I wanted to make working fun for myself and my coworkers, because I knew how much it sucked being there. When they left, they said my boss cried. Immediately after I was fired, California was put on lockdown, and my boss was unable to hire new employees because no one was applying. Long story short, she had to close, and she had been closed since March 26th. I drive past every day on my way home, and they still aren't open. It's unfortunate, but I don't feel bad. Story 7. I used to be into amateur radio after a short stint in the Army Cadets. In the East Midlands, UK, who was one of the adult instructors. He was always telling us about amateur radio and would hand out old and cheaper pieces of tech he'd tried out and wasn't keeping. Anyway, he was a little weird, overly friendly with adults, never had any bad vibes around kids, and obviously had some social anxiety which he was compensating for. Personally, I suspect he was on the autistic spectrum, but who knows? After I left the cadets and went to uni, I stayed in touch on Facebook. We were in the same Facebook group for amateur radio hobbyists. He always liked to do things by the book and instilled in us the importance of being responsible and socially conscious with our radio use. It was the same on Facebook, reminding people that Mrs. Miggins on her 10-pound handset wouldn't know about transmission power and squelch, etc. He mentioned in passing to a new member the importance of only using the public unlicensed channels, kind of like CB radio in the US, on the correct, very low power setting of half a watt. He mentioned it was because Mrs. Miggins trying to reach her kid in the next street wouldn't understand the idea that she could hear you, but couldn't reach you to ask you to be quiet for a minute. He was correct here, and it's also a criminal offense to transmit at higher power on these frequencies, even though it's not enforced. Anyway, this got someone's back up, and he was kicked from the group for preaching. After unsuccessfully asking to be let back in, he set up a larger antenna in his backyard, set up a fancy aerial atop it with a 30-watt transmission system. This is really quite powerful. He now turns on this for several hours a day on whatever channels the radio club and group are using to teach them the importance of good etiquette. This means that nobody can use certain frequencies for hours at a time, as it just sounds like someone is having a one-way conversation on air. He could probably get arrested, but that doesn't seem to bother him at all. Story 8. I worked at a very famous family-oriented company for almost 15 years, where I excelled at my job. Despite refusing to engage in brown-nosing or dirty office politics, I became a trusted advice platform for other employees seeking guidance in workplace issues. However, due to my integrity, I never reported red flags to management, instead encouraging those individuals to do so themselves. Eventually, several key people remembered how I helped them and circumvented usual cronyism to bring me into their teams for significant projects. This was a nice change, and I appreciated the opportunity to stretch myself. However, I was then systematically bullied by the in-crowd who deemed me unworthy of being in their presence. I sought therapy to develop tools to deflect their behavior while also searching for a way out. Finally, I found another job and submitted a manifesto to HR when handing in my 30-day notice. The document detailed racism, sexual harassment, assault, blatant favoritism, and theft, with dates, names, and supporting evidence, resulting in an HR nightmare for the company since they could not control what I did when I left, including going to the press. Although they had 30 days to ask me questions or interview me, it never came to that. However, I also sent the manifesto to the EEOC, which opened an investigation with the company, causing all hell to break loose. People who were previously too afraid to come forward now had an out, as they were complying with an investigation per company policy. As a result, many employees testified to HR about the terrible things they had been subject to. Some people were fired, others were demoted, and a few got off scot-free, but I sleep like a baby now. Story 9. I worked at a Fortune 500 office where one of our long-term team members, G, worked as a level 2 employee for quite a while. She was good enough to be a level 3 or level 4 employee, but never took the offer because she was a single mom and relied on public transportation. G's friend, P, started at the same time she did and was a level 3, working up to a level 4. P and G were all good, until P discovered that G made more than P because she was constantly getting merit raises and performance bonuses. One day, G made an honest mistake. Our client just switched to a different protocol for billing, and she accidentally did it the old way. It was a no harm, no foul situation, but P went to the level 4 employees and senior management and suggested that G be fired. They all went to HR, who said that while there was no valid reason to fire her, they could move her to a team that was less desirable and would basically guarantee her failure. G realized what was happening and secured another job. We were going to be off for 4 days for Christmas, and G quit on Thursday by leaving an after-hours voicemail. G knew that the message wouldn't be received until Monday morning, so she sent out an email to the entire building, timed to be sent at 11:59 p.m. on Christmas Eve. The email detailed how P was having an affair with her brother-in-law while her husband was deployed, how one senior manager took this job because he was fired for embezzlement and lost his CPI license, and how one of our male level 3 employees requested a transfer because our married department manager was harassing him. We got in at 8 a.m., but HR and IT didn't get in until 9 a.m. It was a show Monday morning. Quite a few people quit that day. It could all have been avoided. Story 10. I'm a behavioral interventionist at a middle school. My job is technically to pull disruptive students out of class, get them redirected, then back into their classroom. Most of my job is actually a sounding board and an understanding ear to kids who struggle. My entire job is an example of that, quote. The neglect and abuse of some of those kids will break your heart. Story 11. I received a police call to go to a school. When I arrived, I saw a teacher holding a small child back and another child who looked like he had been hit by a bus. He was on the floor as paramedics took him to the ambulance. I arrested the other child, and while I was questioning him, he said, and I quote, "I want to be noticed." It haunted me, as I sent out a report to do a background check on the parents. It turned out that the child was being neglected, and teachers at the school had reported that others would push past him, shove him, and not even notice him. He was smiling as he said, "People finally looked at me. It's been so long since that. I felt horrible as I passed the case to a different person, as I couldn't handle it." Story 12. My brother. My family wasn't loving, and I coped with it by venturing out and exploring on my own. I would leave early each day and explore nature, only coming home for food. However, my brother coped with the lack of love by turning to all the bad stuff. He had a super distorted view of needing love, and acted like if he wasn't getting love, then the world deserved to burn. He went to prison in his teens, got out in his 20s, tried to be good for a year, but couldn't find his concept of love. So he started burning the village again and went back to prison. Years later, he tried to go clean, and this time, he found love. But he punished himself too hard to be lovable, and developed a super personality built on illegal substances to keep up, lost his love, and started burning the village down again. The last time, the local sheriffs ended the cycle, and he wasn't going back in. During the road chase, they filled his windshield with bullets, and he veered off a cliff and died in the dirt. It was the headline of the local news. I think I may forever compare my life to my brother's. How could we be so different? We had the same parents and endured very similar pains, but I didn't choose to burn down the village. I chose to distance myself and survive. He went nuclear, and the village didn't have a chance. Story 13. I guess I could count myself among those who have cut relatives out of their lives. I made that decision when I was 19, because my family had spent my entire life tormenting me and treating me like dirt. With me gone, there were only 4 left. My aunt, my uncle, my grandmother, and my dad, who is now 58 years old. There was no younger generation to take care of them. My aunt was prepared for that, caring for them in their old age. They would often make fun of me for being incapable of domestic tasks, such as not knowing how to use a washing machine until I Googled it at 19. However, when I asked them to show me how to do things, they made excuses like, "Your school should be teaching you that. You should know how to do that. Figure it out." Or, "I'll show you some other time." They never did show me, though. They enjoyed having evidence of what a horrible, incompetent, and lazy person they saw me as. Moreover, they didn't want me to be able to live independently because that would make it easier for me to move out, which would mean I wouldn't be at their immediate disposal. When I went to university, I lied and said that I was required to live on campus for the first year. I wasn't planning to cut contact yet, but I was desperate for a taste of independence. My aunt gave me my birthday money early so that I could afford the deposit. I felt awful because my aunt was actually the only one who had ever stood up for me. But keeping in contact with her would have been too complicated, and I'm certain she would have put some pressure on me to mend things with the others. Not even a month after I moved into my student accommodation, I got into an argument with my dad and finally stood up for myself. I cut contact and was expecting to become homeless once my lease finished at the end of my first year. I was too mentally ill to complete my studies and hold down a job at the same time. But as luck would have it, everything turned out fine. There were a lot of bumps in the road, but I graduated, didn't end up homeless, and I'm now working in the healthcare system. I don't exactly regret cutting contact, but I'll admit I should have done some research on my options for homelessness instead of hoping for the best. I nearly destroyed my life. Story 14. This could apply to my soon-to-be ex-husband. He has mommy, daddy, and sibling issues. Basically, his parents divorced when he was in grade school, and no one really parented him from that point forward. His dad left, and his mom, in my opinion, has no sense of accountability and can never be wrong about anything. So she's not exactly a great role model. She restarted her career after the divorce and left him in the dust. My husband never really healed from the aftermath of his parents' divorce. I can understand. My own parents' divorce negatively affects me to this day in some ways, though my parents are the polar opposite of his. They're extremely involved in giving. I think the more my parents involved themselves in our lives, the more he realized what a parent was supposed to look like. When our baby was born and my parents worked to be helpful and bond with him, I think it almost showed a giant magnifying glass on the abandonment issues he had buried and ran from his whole life. He cracked this year, ran away with someone, threw me and my loving family away, but briefly got the attention he was yearning from both his absentee parents in his time of crisis. That didn't last too long. He burnt our marriage and the life we had built over 10 plus years to the ground. He felt so sad and wanted me to feel as badly as he did. However, any warmth he enjoyed from doing so quickly dissipated. He regrets everything. Story 15. My uncle was always the black sheep of the family, but it turned out that he had been carefully planning his future from the start. He got a full ride to his dream college, landed a well-paying job, got married, and now has a few months old child. My grandparents, his parents, always thought he was a disappointment since he was their only son. They verbally abused him for a while about how he never lived up to their expectations. However, he knew better and continued to pursue his dreams. He found out that his parents and all 4 of his sisters had run into quite a bit of debt when he was nearly done with college. They came to him for help after he found employment, but he gave his whole family the finger and told them to help themselves. I'm literally the only one among my cousins or siblings who bothered to contact him years after this whole ordeal. At the time, I was too young to understand what was happening, let alone travel by myself. I contacted him via Facebook Messenger, and his wife is a lovely woman. His daughter is so cute and gorgeous, and he still is the same strong, kind-hearted man that I remember. My parents know that I'm in contact with him, but they just don't care. I'll be staying at their house for a little while next week, and I'm glad that I was able to meet my little cousin.